Welcome back to another micro unit guide. This time we're going to take a quick look at the M24 Chaffee. The Chaffee was a late war American light tank intended to replace the Stuart, and it reflects the struggles in making light tanks work on the battlefield. One of the first things the US Army did after encountering German armour in North Africa was disband its light tank battalions and start shunting light tanks into supporting roles alongside medium tanks and cavalry. The main problem with the Stuart was its inadequate firepower for the European theatre. The 37mm gun was really insufficient for both anti-tank and anti-vehicle work compared to the more successful 75mm gun of the Sherman. As it proved too difficult to adapt the Stuart itself to mount a 75mm gun, a new design was needed. The Ordnance Corps essentially merged elements of the existing Stuart M5 with the T7 light tank design and made use of a lightweight version of the Sherman's 75. The design was deemed a success, and production began in April 1944 of the M24 Chaffee. Although about 5,000 M24s were made before the end of the war, they only started reaching Europe in December 1944, and as a result saw a limited service in World War II. Some of them went on to fight in post-war conflicts, notably in Korea and Indochina, while in 1965 several fought against M47 Pattons in Spain under the command of Telly Savalas. Starting at the front for our digital walkaround, it's clear that the Chaffee looks a lot more like a modern tank than the Stuart does. On the starboard side of the hull we have the assistant driver's position. Aside from operating the radio, he's also got a ball-mounted 30caliber machine gun to amuse himself with. Next to him on the port side is the driver. Both the hull crew have their own hatches with rotating periscopes. They're relatively far back in the hull as well, courtesy of the front slope. At their feet, behind a hexagonal hatch, is the tank's transmission. And the front slope itself is much more aggressively angled than earlier designs, mostly as a means of increasing armour protection without increasing weight. That doesn't mean that the Chaffee is well protected. That frontal armour isn't going to stop anything the Germans are realistically going to throw at it all the way out to 1,000 metres. It is a light tank after all. It's sacrificing armour protection for speed and firepower. Speaking of speed, if we go round to the rear of the Chaffee, we have the engine compartment with the usual array of grills and hatches. Running it through the vehicle mobility test for some arbitrary but comparable numbers, the Chaffee scored 592 points. For reference, an M4A3 Sherman scored 849, and the N3A1 half-track scored 642. We'd expect a light tank to be more mobile than them, so we're in the ballpark there. We can also make a more direct comparison with the Stuart M5 because they actually use the same engine and transmission. The Stuart is a bit lighter at 15.7 tonnes compared to the Chaffee's 18.4, so we'd expect the Chaffee to have a slightly higher score. That's exactly what we get. The Stuart got 581 points on the test. One key difference between the two is that the Stuart uses a bogie suspension system while the Chaffee uses torsion bars. So in theory, the Chaffee has a smoother ride, which would make spotting and target engagement easier when on the move. This is pretty much impossible to test in combat mission. In any case, if you find yourself trying to engage targets on the move, you've probably gone wrong somewhere. Moving up to the turret, the big deal here is the main gun. One of the big shortcomings of the Stuart was the 37mm gun. The Chaffee instead uses a 75. This is, in fact, a variant of the 75 used in the Sherman that was adapted for use in the B-25 Mitchell. Some weight-saving measures were needed to get the 75mm airborne in the B-25, and these made it a prime candidate for the M24, which also needed to keep the weight and size down. So this is essentially the same 75mm gun as found on the Sherman. We've covered the Sherman's 75 before, so I won't go into detail here. Suffice to say that this is a significant upgrade on the Stuart's 37, and the Chaffee is punching above its weight class. It carries 48 rounds in total. In combat mission that's broken down into 25 HE, 20 AP and 3 white phosphorus, along with over 3,000 rounds of 30 cal ammunition for the machine guns. The rest of the turret front is pretty standard. Starboard we have a coaxial 30 cal machine gun, port we have the gunner's sight. Above that, the gunner also has a periscope for a wider field of view. Behind the gunner's position is the commander's hatch. This is on top of a low cupola, which is another improvement over the Stuart. On the other side of the turret from the commander and the gunner is the loader. He's got a hatch, but it doesn't look like he's got any vision ports or periscopes or anything like that. On the rear of the turret, we've got the almost obligatory 50 caliber M2 machine gun. This is intended for anti-aircraft work, though the 50s saw much more work in the late war period against enemy infantry and lighter targets, given the Luftwaffe wasn't really in the game. This one is set up to be used by someone stood on the rear deck. There isn't a means of remote controlling it from inside the turret. In combat mission terms, that means that nobody can actually use it, so it's sadly just eye candy. Also on the back of the turret we've got the antenna for the radio. And that's the quick once over of the M24 Chaffee. It's interesting to compare to the Stuart because they're light tanks from different points along the trajectory of tank design as it changed with experience over World War II. Fundamentally though, it arrived too late and in too small a number to really make an impact. Even if it had done, it's hard to see the design altering the course of light tank development in the post-war period after they accumulated so many question marks in action. But still, as usual, tank is better than no tank. A speedy little 75mm gun platform is a useful asset, especially in the context of fighting in Germany in 1945, where enemy armour is really not that likely to be turning up to the same parties. If we think about a reconnaissance or cavalry role, the Chaffee has the ability to deal with a wider array of potential opposition than the Stuart, so where a Stuart unit might get stopped by encountering Stugs, Panzer IVs or even well-protected infantry or anti-tank gun positions, Chaffee-equipped squadrons have a much better chance of blasting through and keeping the momentum going. That said, it's definitely a glass cannon. The Chaffee really needs to rely on its speed and mobility to make sure it gets into engagements where the chance of return fire is minimal. It can't take a hit. So that's the Chaffee. Hope you all enjoyed this one and found it interesting. If you'd like to see these videos early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon or YouTube memberships. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.